Hello, everybody. This is Lane Kawoko with the Simple Passive Cash Flow Podcast. I've got Buck Joffrey. How's it going, Buck?
Good. How are you doing, man?
Good. This has been a while. I think we had you on podcast 17.
Yeah.
Entrepreneur, Dr. Buck Joffrey.
Yeah,
It's been a
man.
while.
It has been a long time. I think that was I did that in my house in Chicago, and I'm not
Yeah.
even in Chicago anymore.
Yeah, and you're on what episode well over 100 right now on Wealth Formula
Yeah.
Podcast.
Yeah, I think 104, 105, something like that.
And definitely got a lot better. Remember that editing that first podcast and saying,
Yeah.
a lot of ahs and ums are gone now, huh?
Well, now I've got an editor on mine, so who has to deal with all of my ahs and ums and takes them all out. But the podcast has taken off. It's in the business category in the top 30. It's in the investing category in the top 10. So it's going very well.
Yeah, so you guys can go back and check out that podcast, but I want to kind of dig into your story here a little bit because we kind of just briefly touched upon it. Basically, you're a high-paid doctor, then you got fired, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Describe yourself as an employee. I mean, looking back at that, I mean, you're a little younger.
Yeah, the interesting thing is it was like a transformation because when I was when you're in medical school and when you're in residency, in order to succeed, you have to be, I mean, honestly, you really do. And I'll just be honest, you blatantly have to be a massive butt kisser, right? You just have to kiss butt. And the more you kiss butt, the better you will do when you're on the wards, as a medical student, when you're a resident. It's just this massive hierarchical thing. And so I was quite good at ass kissing. I was quite good.
What you put your mind to you.
Huh?
Right?
Yeah, what? Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was a dedicated ass kisser. And I don't, for me at the time, I think what I was just thinking is, hey, it's a means to an end, right? I mean, I know these people influence my career, and so I'm going to make them like me. I know what I need to do in order to get, good grades, and I know what I need to do to, be liked. In residency, actually, I have to say that what happened was pretty quickly, I wasn't a very good resident because in medical school, I was good at the butt kissing, but I think I burned out. I burned out on butt kissing by residency. And I actually started to become who I really am, which is a horribly unemployable individual. And I think that's where it really started, is just feeling like I just didn't like working for anybody else. And so that was a major driving force behind me ultimately that, that led to where I am. And sometimes getting fired, which I did from my first job about 9 months in, is like the best thing that could happen. I got fired because of disagreements with management. I was working for a big company, and they had, the person who was overseeing me was like, her last job was as a manager at like one of these major hair salons like Vidal Sassoon or Mario Cicosi or something like that. And I couldn't believe I had to like answer to this
And you guys make a lot more than, right?
What?
You make a lot more than those guys, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, over the office manager. Yeah. I mean, I was making about $500,000 and maybe she was making 50, 60, but she technically had like some ability to boss me around, and I didn't like it. And ultimately she reported corporate and blah, blah, blah. And they made up these stories about how I was going to start my own practice in Khabib. And I was asked to leave at that point, but that was actually a really, really good thing for me. I think part of the problem with high paid professionals in general and good students, and you were one of them too, Lane, so you'll get this. You get in a habit of success, right? You get in a habit of getting A's. And when you get A's, people think, you get this positive feedback. It's almost like a Pavlovian loop. And so you want more of it. and you want more success, you want more A's, you want people to tell you what to do, you do it, and you're like this panting dog that's wagging its tail. And you get into that cycle. And so it's very, very difficult to break out of that on your own, by your own decision, to all of a sudden say, hey, I'm going to stop doing this and I'm going to take a risk at failing and doing something on my own. So sometimes it's easier if somebody kicks you out and makes you do it, and you're in free fall and you're like, whoa, I kind of like this. And that's what happened to me.
Oh, yeah. I actually had a similar experience. I never really talked about it in the podcast, but I'll go ahead and tell you this now. But not going to go into the details since they'll probably send me a nasty letter. But, I was working for this big company too. And I was working them slaving away for like 8 years, traveling on the road for like 5 years straight, living in hotels. And I got put in this $120 million project. And one of my, there was kind of a precedent setting. I really don't want to go into the details. I'll tell you another day, Buck. But basically, I wrote like an email a wrong way saying something was this way, and it wasn't. And they brought me in, one day I get this Outlook invite with HR. And then, they bring me in with my manager who, is just one of those pleasers, younger people poised for higher growth.
Right.
And the director and the HR person. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know where this is going. It's one of those, hey, you got 90 days to get your stuff together or we're going to fire you. Yeah. And I'm like, I've been here for 8 years. I'm actually pretty good at this stuff. What the heck did I do? Right. And it was all because of that, that questionable email that I sent. There was nothing.
They put you on like probation or something?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what it is like, when something like that goes out and there's precedent setting with other legal matters and they have to separate you from the company. Right. And I'm like, okay. Because in the meeting, I'm like, generally want to help out, right? Like, I'm like, okay, what is it that I need to improve on? Can you give me any specifics? And they're like, I'm like, okay, I got it. That's cool. Thanks for the.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is pretty classic, right? I mean, you were an A student, were you? Or it might be more like a B or C student?
More like a B student, yeah.
Okay, well, so that's probably why you're actually an entrepreneur, right? So, because you actually occasionally failed, right? I didn't, but that feeling that you get when somebody is scolding you, right? It's almost sort of like, it's like getting a bad grade in school,
right?
Until you didn't do something right. It's a terrible feeling, right? And we want very much to avoid that kind of feeling. And that's what keeps us driven, to perform and continue to, to please. We're trained to be pleasers, right? That's what we are at school. Think about it. The whole school system that we have, so the school system that we have, the 12 grades and all that. So this was something that was created back during the Industrial Revolution. And if you think about the way that this thing is set up, it's almost like a conveyor belt, right? You go first grade, plop, second grade, plop, and you get information at each one of those stations. And then 12 stations later, you have this final product. Of course, some people fall off the conveyor belt. They don't make it. And then some products are, come out a little bit nicer and they go on, for a little finish in the form of professional school. But it's a very stereotype kind of school system that we have. And, we are all sort of programmed. We're all like robots that come out of that. And we just try to absorb, and we try to, and we're told that if we can absorb this stuff, that's success. And so it's difficult to have these kind of, different life situations outside of that, because you're not used to, all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, tell me what to do better. Because in school, they could tell you what to do better, right? You got a math problem wrong. Get it right next time, Lane. Right? but you can't do that anymore. It's very frustrating.
Right. Right. And that same emotion comes up, right? You get angry, right? You got angry.
Yeah, you get very angry. And then you can't do anything about it because you don't want to get fired, right? And that's the worst feeling, because it's like you're like a well-paid man in a cage.
Yeah. And you're like, these
Terrible.
bozos, like, at the time I had a couple rentals, and it all became super clear. I was like, what is this bozo telling me to do? I make more than them.
I know. It's terrible. It's terrible. And I think I think that's one of the things that I couldn't deal with is, and listen, I know there's plenty of people out there who are just happy with their gig, and good for you. I mean, it actually is not a blessing to be unemployable. It's, I have been lucky in that my entrepreneurial stuff has gone well for me, and I make a lot more money than I would have as an employee. But on the other hand, sometimes I look and think, this is kind of a curse, right? I mean, think of all these people who seem to be pretty darn happy, just, going to work and clocking in, clocking out.
Right. I mean, it's like that guy in the Matrix, right? He took the red pill and then he got all pissed off, and he was like, then he tried to screw everybody, right? When they're in the Matrix.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be awakened.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I mean, but I kind of like it. I kind of like being in this world. I kind of think of the entrepreneurial world as being a little bit more gritty, and it's sort of closer to the underbelly of the world, right? It's like we at least for me, it's like, I get to eat what I kill, and it's a rush all the time, so it's kind of fun.
Cool. And then, once you got fired, then you read the cash flow quadrant, right?
No, it was the other way around. What happened was, I think, I finished residency and I couldn't figure out why I was pissed off all the time. And, I got disgruntled from academics. I was a big academic guy. I used to write a bunch of papers and book chapters and all that sort of thing. And then decided, that was my way of keeping score back then. Now it's making money. But, so what happened was that I decided I wasn't going to stick with academics, which was a big surprise to a lot of people in the program. And, but I didn't know what I was going to do. So I got married the day after residency graduation, and my wife and I went to Puerto Vallarta. And on the way back, it was a dingy Mexican airport, and you got the little bookstore that's about as big as maybe your apartment there, Lane, or something like that.
Probably
a closet, just a little closet. And there was like 2 books in there, and one was like some romance harlot novel kind of thing, and the other one was Kiyosaki's Cash Flow Quadrant. So I grabbed that, and I literally read it on the plane, and it was transformational. And then for me, I just realized, well, gosh, there's this whole new world. I don't have to be in this world where everybody's my boss, and I have to be controlled, and I have to, listen to what people tell me to do, or have the fear of losing my, job or my position. And that's really what brought it on. And ultimately, I will tell you that Robert Kiyosaki, no question in my mind, is responsible for me getting fired in that first job, because he just gave me the itch. And I told him that, by the way. I told him that on the summit a couple years ago. I was like, I told him the whole story I'm just telling you right now. And he was laughing, and he's like, too bad we lost one of our doctors. And I'm like, well, no, I don't see it that way. So
So, you already had this itch. A lot of people, they always talk to 2 other excuses that they have versus, that they spent all this sunk costs going to residency or going to this high professional school, getting the accreditation. And then the second thing is, what will their parents say? What were you thinking on those 2 fronts?
Well, my parents, oddly enough, didn't really care. They just, I had the medical degree, and so my mom got to say her son was a doctor. and my dad is a real estate guy. He's been a slumlord for 15 years. So he was pretty happy. He was trying to talk me out of going to med school, because
he was an engineer, right?
Yeah, he was an engineer. And, came to from India. He came from India in 1967. I was born in 73 and started out. And here's the funny thing, Lane, is so he actually ended up getting fired from his job because he was like calling around and trying to make real estate deals from his office, and they caught him and he wouldn't stop. So they fired him. How funny is that? I mean, totally. I mean, the apple does not fall far from the tree.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. These employers, they'll let you watch porn at your desk and do all this kind of stuff, but as soon as you start to make money on the side, like you do a little internet survey, they fire you,
Well, yeah, I mean, so my dad, is total gritty immigrant guy who's just like, buying cheap houses in the ghetto, and he'd go and like, I don't know how many times he's almost been killed. I mean, and actually there's a story that my parents laugh about now, but it's like how I saved my dad's life when I was like 3 years old because some guy came at him. Some guy came at him, like a tenant came at him with a knife or something like that, and I started screaming, and the guy got freaked out and ran away. But yeah, that's my dad. So no, that wasn't a real issue. What was the other one you said? The issue of all the training and stuff.
Yeah, all the sunk costs, all these years went into this. Maybe I'll just try and do another 6 months or 18 months, which ultimately ends up to be another 5.
Well, remember, for me, what I didn't leave medicine. What I decided to do is say, listen, I have this skill set and this degree and everything. What can I do that takes me out of the W-2 quadrant? So what I did is I started my own business. But at that point, like, I was reading voraciously about business and entrepreneurship and all this. And so I started right off the bat saying, okay, well, I'm not going to put my name on the door because that's exactly what every dumb, surgeon does, because they want the ego thing, right? They want to be famous. They want to be a famous doctor.
Right. When everybody's doing it, don't do it.
Yeah. So I had a brand. It was a cosmetic surgery brand in Chicago that just, I took and went real, TV, radio, internet. I mean, I didn't have the money for any of it. I borrowed it all. I had zero money. I was broke, and it worked. So, the first 6 to 9 months of that, I didn't make any money. I mean, it was just nothing. We were down to like, at that time, my wife and I, my oldest daughter was 9. I think she was 8 or 9 months old. We were living in a rental, and we were down to like our last $2,000. My wife didn't know, of course. I never told her that, but until later, she would have freaked out on me. But the next year, like, I made $1 million for the first time, and so it's that's how it happened. So I just took this concept in my head of, okay, well, I can just do this on my own. I'll give it a try and just use some of these principles and try to get out of that W-2. And maybe I'm an S for a while, and then I can kind of, self-employed guy, and then I can phase myself out because I have a brand and I'm not just making myself famous and have a couple guys working for me. And that's exactly what happened. So right now I live in Santa Barbara. I've got a couple guys in that Chicago office. There's a couple more businesses that I started in Chicago since then. Jeannie runs them all. You met Jeannie at the Note Buyer conference.
Yeah.
My COO. And that's pretty much what happened. And then as far as the real estate stuff, guys, this is the thing to remember, is that, like, there's a lot of real estate groupies out there, and the idea of real estate sounds really good, right? I mean, who doesn't want passive income and all this?
Right.
What is it? Smart
Sometimes
passive income? Smart. What is it?
Simple
Passive income. Simple passive. Smart. That's Pat Flynn, right?
Yeah.
So you're simple. He's smart. But remember, there's a formula to all this, right? There's a formula, and I always call it the wealth formula. And the wealth formula ultimately is, the math behind it is simple. You have to have a lot of money to invest, which is a mass. You have to have money to invest, some kind of money in the first place. And then you utilize velocity of money and leverage. And that's how you make a lot of money. The thing that people forget a lot of times is the whole M part, the mass, the actual fact that they actually have to have money if they're going to create, cash flow. So you're like, yeah, I want to, I'm going to have $40,000 of cash flow a month.
I want to get 1,000 units.
I want 1,000 units, and all this stuff, and that's great. But you got to say, okay, well, you do need to have a little bit of money in order to do that, right? So that's where I think that I'm a little bit different. I think I like to kind of come at this whole thing holistically and say, okay, well, let's figure out how are you going to make more money as well. Because if you can figure out how to make more money, you can create more passive cash flow. So there's a step that people frequently forget. And I think that that's one that I like to focus on as well.
Yeah. You've told me this a while back, and I kind of embodied it in terms of the engineering way. You can only invest in real estate and make like 20% plus or minus 5%. I mean, unless you're doing super crazy stuff, which I wouldn't suggest, you're not going to make much higher. So do the math, and this is what you're going to get in 5, 10, 15 years. But if you want more than that, it always comes back to that square one. Like you said, you got to make more money. So I was like, well, got to make more money.
Well, right. So what can you do? I mean, you can do, there are a number of ways you can do that, but they're really some, in some way, shape, or form involved being entrepreneurial. Honestly, that's literally is like, even if that means just driving for Uber, it's still like, if I was a resident when I was a resident, if Uber was around, I totally would have driven for Uber. I was looking for something like that, but there was nothing back then. And there's so many different ways to make more money. The idea is, and this is important though, because even like, when you hear Robert Kiyosaki, one thing that he says, I don't know if people really catch on to what he means by this, but he says that my businesses buy my real estate. That's what he says. So Robert Kiyosaki, who everybody knows and thinks of is this as the real estate guy, right? He's a real estate guy. That's what you think of him. But the truth of the matter is his massive amounts of cash flow come from the Rich Dad Company and the book sales and all that. That's where he makes all of his money. And then he invests his money in real estate. And he told me on the cruise, he said, it's funny that most people seem to think of me as a real estate guy, but really I'm a guy who invests in real estate. Mostly I just invest with Ken McElroy. That's what he told me. So
apartment buildings, yeah.
So yeah, you don't have to. And with Kenny, of course, now you're talking about, like you said, I mean, Kenny's got a great track record over time, and it's an annualized return. Maybe it's, 20% plus. But I mean, in the first place, where do you create more income? You have to figure out a way to do that if you really want to get out of whatever you're calling it, the rat race, the golden handcuffs, the cubicle, escaping the cubicle, whatever it is for you. You have to figure out how you're going to make more money first. And I look around, Lane, and there's so many ways to do it. And I'm always amazed at to me, it's like being a kid in a candy store, right? You gotta just pick something and go with it. I mean, I'm just looking, we were at this note buying thing, right? And if you're a smart guy or gal or whatever, and you really sunk your tooth in this note buying thing, you probably make some money, and that'd be a good place to, get some ass. I just interviewed this guy, this land guy, Mark Podolsky.
Yeah, the land geek.
Yeah, so I kind of thought when I told him this too. When I heard about what he was doing, I thought this is a big scam. I just wanted to kind of find out what he's doing, but I think he's pretty legit. I mean, and he's a smart guy. He's like a investment banker before, and what he's doing is pretty genius. And if you look at these different things, if you just sink your teeth into them, there's a million things out there like this that may not take a huge amount of time if you have nothing else besides your job and you want to try to do something else, but could result in making quite a decent sum of money that you can then use to invest in these slow burn things like real estate.
Right. And yeah, let's talk about a few of those, because I've heard you say, use the baseball analogy too, right? Like, everybody sees the guys going after these home runs, but they don't, see the guys taking the singles initially. What were some of those chipper businesses you started initially?
Well, it's not even so much like so I don't know if it's chippers because I don't really like at this point. It's quite the opposite of what you're saying now. Because when I look at businesses, and I've started about 5 businesses now, and separate different kinds of businesses. And what I've realized was that pretty much they're all the same effort, right? But some have ceilings of, maybe $1 million, and then others really don't have a ceiling, right? Like they could scale into, $100 million, and it's the same effort. So I think that's one thing to think about first is if you're going to get involved with something, if you got to think anyway, as Donald Trump, and I don't hate to quote that guy, but as Donald Trump said, if you're going to think anyway, think big, right? So the interesting thing is that a lot of these things that you find are you have to look at them. There's a lot of shiny objects out there, but you have to think how much effort is there that's going to go into this, and how much would it actually pay me? I mean, one of the things that I think, and I'll just, people are really into this small medical facility thing. I think that's a perfect example of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the last podcast you were saying, okay, this is the next thing I'm going to try and do.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I get smarter over time. I mean, I definitely am constantly changing my perspective. When the last podcast we did, to me, the idea of, putting something together like this and making it, $300,000 a year sounded appealing. But then I started thinking, yeah, it's actually a lot of work.
Yeah, because
right?
once you make one, you got to do it again.
You got to do it again. You got to do it again. So if you really want to scale, that's a tough one. It's very operations intensive. And if it's operations intensive, it becomes managerially intensive, and it's brick and mortar. Before you know it, you've got some significant risk on your hands. And so that's why I kind of opted out of that. And there's lots of different ways where you don't have a huge amount of risk and that you can potentially scale if you get traction. But the other thing that you were talking about, I think you were talking about the singles and the chips and stuff, like, instead of home runs, is that a lot of these interesting businesses, or, fairly straightforward businesses that can potentially make a lot of money on the side, they never look in the same direction that everybody else is, right? Because the more glamorous a business, the more competitive it is, and the less money you're going to make doing it, and the higher risk there is for failure. A friend of mine here in town, his father-in-law passed away, but he had a huge janitor company. Like he started out as a janitor, and he created a multi-million-dollar janitorial company. And my friend tells me, I asked the guy how he did it. And he said, well, no one else wanted to clean up the shit. So the point is that, listen, you can do what I did and start a cosmetic surgery company. And if I had to do it over again, and luckily we're successful and we're making money still, but that's not smart. Everybody wanted, every surgeon there's a plastic surgeon on every block in Chicago. It's not a smart thing to do, but then now we have a behavioral therapy business where it's a great business. I mean, Jeannie, my COO, it was her idea, dealing with kids in home with autism. And we hire behavioral therapists who are specialized in this, and there was a need for it. It's underserved in Chicago, and it's a very, successful, thriving business with very little overhead. And it's like, all right, well, that's not very sexy though, right? It's not sexy. I mean, it's doing a good thing, but it's not sexy at all. No one's looking for that. So that's the moral of the story is,
Right.
look for interesting stuff and try not to do what everybody else is doing, because it's going to be hard.
Right. Like things that come to mind that everybody likes to do is, all the kids like to play with Bitcoin, buying, trading that stuff. Short-term rentals, another one.
Yeah. Well, I have a Bitcoin hedge fund, so I won't say, but
But
not,
that's buying the initial coin offerings. It's
right.
not
It's
what
most,
kids,
yeah, it's
yeah.
ICOs and pre-sales and altcoins and stuff.
Yeah, not what these kids on. I mean, there's so many meetup
Yeah.
groups out
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
that be a Bitcoin investor. I'm like, okay, but
Well,
yeah,
I mean, listen, I have you, and I know you have too. I have traction in multifamily real estate, right? And the the trouble is that with that area is that, first of all, we're at the top of the cycle. It's probably not a good time to buy for most people anyway. And if you're just starting to get into it, it's probably not a particularly good time to get into that as well. But there's so much competition, and everybody makes it seem like it's really easy. I mean, why? Well, in part because a lot of the people who are successful, who seem pretty, when you talk to them, they're like, yeah, this bonehead just did this. I can't believe how he did it.
Dallas made a lot of people look really smart.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. If anybody who bought an apartment building of any kind between 2009 and 2015 came out looking like an absolute genius. It doesn't mean that that's going to happen again, or that's going to happen in right now if you buy. So I don't know, and it's so competitive. It's so darn competitive, and it takes so much to get into. I mean, it's been so if everybody's looking there, maybe you should look somewhere else. I mean, one of the things I liked about the notes lane is that it's so fragmented. The notes conference that we went to with George was it was so fragmented. You could tell there's no really good education in this. There's no really good platforms for this. And when you see something like that, and if you're a pretty organized guy, and you want to make some effort, there's an opportunity there. You can definitely see there's an opportunity there if you're willing to spend the time and the money, especially for like you engineering guys, because it's a very much an underwriting play, right? I mean, it's not. I mean, this is not being doing due diligence and looking at these apartment buildings and all that. It's really a dude. It's almost an actuarial play.
Right. I mean, it's sorting tables and making your own little quasi formulas to make a power ranking in a way.
Right. But even though there's some players in it, there's some big players in it. It's a huge market, and the reality is there's not a lot of really good smaller players involved. And the reason for that is I just don't feel like there's enough education out there, any good education out there to really get people, to the point where they can start executing this on their own. And I think you take that problem and you turn it into a business, because every problem is ultimately you can turn into a business. So.
Right. And a lot of these calls I have, it's with, the guys like, well, I want to own an apartment building. I'm like, well, where did you get that idea? Just like, where'd you get the idea to go to college? It's just the normal progression. And I think you need to see what the normal progression is. And like you said, try and get away from that.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I think gauge how much work it is versus how much, how much reward there is. I think that most people are better off investing if they're professionals or busy professionals. They're better off investing in apartment buildings, et cetera, via some kind of syndication, fractional ownership vehicle, when they can leverage, a sponsor that is on the ground, an operator who's actually doing the work. I think that's a really important distinction. I think usually usually at this point, I think that, especially given where we are in the cycle, somebody wants to come in and just, I work 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week, and I'm going to buy an apartment building. It may not go well, right? Because as you've come to realize, I think that it's a little bit more difficult than that. And what I think we're going to see in the next couple of years as cap rates compress is a lot of those people who are buying right now, who are flying right now and doing okay are going to get killed. Part of it is because cap rate compression that people, there's two things that cap rate compression does. One is obviously, you can say, listen, now I can't sell this for as much money. Yeah, that's not a real problem if you're cash flowing, right? But but a lot of banks will come back and say, hey, we've reappraised the value of your building. And I don't care if you're really cash flowing, you owe us a bunch of money because your loan to value criteria is not intact. Robert Kiyosaki was telling me that happened to him back in 2008. He's like, what do you mean? What do you mean I need to? He's like, I'm cash flowing in double digits. What do you mean? And the guy's like, no, well, that's, as part of the loan agreement, you have to have, you had to have a, 70% LTV, and the value of your property's gone way down. So I think that's going to happen to a lot of these rookies who are jumping in way over their skis. And we've talked about my feelings on this. I won't point anything specifically, but you kind of know what I'm talking about. So
yeah, I mean, I get pitched a lot of deals these days, and I can't tell from first looking at, because they all have a nice shiny PDF, nice portrait with a suit on, but they're using crazy assumptions like 5% rent increases per year, 95% occupancy, just to name a few. Some of these assumptions they're using, and then I'm like, well, am I doing things wrong? Because they seem really certain that this is how they do it.
Yeah. Well, and you also have to see who's behind it. I mean, I think that you can't look at anything. You can't look at anything seriously without knowing who the sponsors are and knowing their track record or having some connection with them, that whole know, like, and trust thing we talk about.
Right.
I mean,
right.
5% increases in rent. Yeah, I mean, that's, if you're not going to do much with it, which most of these current buyers aren't going to do much to the building, is not a good assumption. But if you've got $10 million in capital expenditures that you set aside to do a massive value add, yeah, I mean, that's a very potentially reasonable thing to do, because that's the whole play, right? So it's totally depends on your deal. And really, though, it ultimately starts with understanding who's behind the deal, who's the sponsor. So,
all right. So I got this last few questions here. So simple passive cash flow listeners are kind of unusual creatures. They're kind of like me. You get me in a room with a bunch of W-2 workers. They're talking about their freaking flyer miles and their fancy cars, and I'm kind of bored out of my mind. What are your thoughts on this, coping with W-2?
oh well. So now I live in Santa Barbara and actually live in Montecito, and I don't really even know W-2 people anymore. I really don't. It's like everybody here is an entrepreneur, which is pretty cool. I don't live in that world anymore, right? And for me, it's really good because like my W-2 friends would usually just look at me cross-eyed and bored, because to them, they left their job at work, and they were not a lot of my W-2 friends, the doctors in specific, were not very aspirational outside of that. So, listen, I think there's I think the nice thing these days is that if you are the type who is W-2 and you want to learn these different things, you can create your own communities via things like this. I mean, you've got a podcast, you got a bunch of people who are just like, you obviously resonate with what Lane does, and Lane's not your typical W-2 guy. he's, aspirational. He's interested in things outside of just work and buying fancy cars and things like that. And then we talk about investing and creating some level of freedom. The nice thing is that these days you can do that on communities. I mean, we certainly have on, Wealth Formula Network. It's part of the course we did, but the podcasts and I know you have a Facebook group. These things I think become your new community. Your community doesn't have to be brick and mortar, right? I mean, it's these days, more people spend more time on their phones than they do with other people. So
Right. Yeah, most times these guys spend more time in their car listening to podcasts. They become your friend there.
Yeah. Right.
So one of your big projects these days is teaching your daughters this lifestyle, the entrepreneur. What are some ways that you've kind of tweaked things to teach these lessons?
Well, it's a little challenging because, well, first of all, my girls are little, right? They're 9, 5, and 3. So 5 and 3-year-old, they're up. The 9-year-old, I'm trying to try a little bit. The challenge is a little bit, again, we live in an area that there's a tremendous amount of affluence, I live about a mile away from Oprah and it's, massive estates everywhere and it just completely warps their sense of,
Right.
reality.
Because one of the ingredients into this whole mess is you have a pain point. You have a need for money.
Yeah,
I mean, it's capitalism, right?
exactly. Yeah. So, I think what you do is, first of all, I can't say that I've gotten to the point where I really know how to crack that nut, but I can tell you that what I'd like to do with my daughter is, for me, I was talking to George Newberry about this, and George and I are very, very similar in mindset. And, he's kind of a, raging entrepreneur, and I am too. And when we talk about money, we see it very similarly. George said something that resonated with me. He said, with entrepreneurship, yeah, I've made a lot of money, but I always kind of look at money as a way of keeping score. And that's exactly how I look at it. So, what's more addictive than, a game, right? What's more addictive than that? Your little dopamine hits. And that's effectively what I do. So with my oldest daughter, I think she's a lot like me. And I think that that's what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to create this sort of an environment of, games, right? Like, how can we make money? Let's try to make some money. And so I think I might try to do some projects with her. For example, I'm looking at potentially doing something like Amazon book arbitrage. Like Amazon will buy back books immediately after you buy them at lower cost and automate that. Things like that where, I can actually, instead of giving her an allowance, I was thinking about giving her business loans. Or if she wanted to sell something online or something like that, instead of giving her money, giving her things to sell. I think there's lots of ways to do it. The other thing is, when she does make money, I'm willing to basically take her money and pay her, pay her cash flow in exchange if she wants to lock it up for a year. So there's lots of different things you can do. I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I've heard of that concept of the gamification.
Right.
Guy does it on his website for like diet and exercise because people obviously don't like to do that. Just like they don't really like to do money stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of makes it into this like game where you get like points, a lot of my audience can resonate with this, playing Zelda or all these RPGs, Final Fantasy growing up. What are you doing playing this game, right? Oh, I'm collecting these items and getting experience points and collecting spells so you can get more spells and more experience points.
Well, yeah. And so to me, like, honestly, business doing entrepreneurial stuff, that's what it is. I mean, it's total dopamine hits. That's all it is. Right. So if I understand that about myself and how do I get her excited, it's not that I don't really, care if she's making a lot of money or whatever when she grows up, but I just want her to be industrious. I want her to be excited about something. So I think planting some of these seeds of like, you know, creating your own business, or, you know, understanding how you can make money and doing it yourself and seeing those as victories, I think is powerful. I mean, because otherwise, you know, if all they have is you know, it's so, you know, they've got everything they want. You know, they've got everything they need. There's no pain, right? So what's the only other option in my view is to make it into a game. So
Yeah. So what if they want to, you know, you teach them all this. What if they just want to work for the man or do Peace Corps?
sure. I mean, actually, personally, I, you know, I just want them to be happy. I don't really care. I just want them to be happy and industrious. Um, you know, I think, uh, you know, hopefully, you know, I just don't want them to worry about money too much. I think they'll be okay there. But I just want them to be happy and industrious. And so, I think sometimes though that these things, you take a little bit of genetics and you take a little bit of teaching. What I mean by genetics is, you know, there's certain things about my daughter. I mean, she's just like me, right? I mean, I didn't teach her to be that way. She just is. And then when you have that, it's almost like if you're a parent, and you have a kid like that, it's kind of cool for a kid if their parent is willing to teach them. It's like, you know, this kid came with like an instruction book,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like an instruction manual or something like that. Because I know exactly like the way she is right now. So I just have to put myself in her shoes and say, what would get me motivated? What would make me excited? But, you know, listen, I don't think for me, it's not about the money, but it is about making sure that I feel like they're doing things, being industrious and not running around like the Kardashians or something, you know?
Right. Right. To be able to make the decision
Right.
in the future. Well, cool. I mean, you've kind of focusing on teaching the kids, but you know, you've got this course that pretty much summed up the last couple years at Wealth Formula. Tell us about that.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, this is a course called Your Roadmap to Real Wealth. So again, back in 2009 and 2010, when I started that business and I started making money for the first time in my life, you know, a big part of this transition for me was reading Robert Kiyosaki and saying, well, gosh, there's this cash flow quadrant out there. And now I have to, you know, what do I do next? And that's what I couldn't figure out, because Robert's books are fantastic, but they don't really give you the next step, right? They
It's
don't
not a
tell you.
how-to book.
Yeah, it's not a how-to book. It's more a mindset book. Okay, here you go. And that's why you see people running around saying, yeah, passive income, man. I'm on
Yeah.
passive income, right?
Sell
But
this lipstick and these tights and these bags. Yeah. Robert Kiyosaki.
hey, I want to tell you a secret. Did you know about cash flow?
Yeah. We're selling telecom services.
Right. So at that point, I was there too, right? So I'm like, cash flow, want to do something big. So when I started making money, I started realizing that, okay, so now I'm making money. So I'm doing it in this other quadrant, but now I want to invest this stuff. And that's where I think a lot of professionals really trip up, because it's like, okay, you can make a lot of money, but now what do you do with it? And again, going back to that whole school system and conventional wisdom, when there's no more school and there's no more curriculum, we turn to conventional wisdom. And conventional wisdom in the world of finance is a problem, because it was written by Wall Street. And Wall Street, it's sort of like the fox guarding the hen house, right? They're telling you what to do. And in the meantime, they're going to leech off all your money. Your dog there, Lane?
Yeah.
So
That's the signal. That's the signal. We got to wrap this up, Sam.
okay. So bottom line is I created the course that I wish I had back in 2009. When I went from, ultimately since then, you know, I've gone from, you know, being a couple $100,000 in debt to, you know, being in the, you know, 8-figure territory with net worth. How do you get there? and what's the play-by-play. And I'm not just talking about investing. It's not just about real estate. It's understanding that there's a completely different way of thinking, and there ultimately is two tiers of investors in this world. There's the poor, middle class, and even the upper middle class, and then there's the affluent. They run by two different sets of rules. They have two different sets of strategies, and who do you think does better?
Oh,
Right?
the rich guys
The
always seem
rich
to.
guys.
Yeah.
And so what I'm doing in this course is revealing what I've learned in the last 7-8 years, because the reason I've been able to create as much wealth as I have in a short period of time is because I've moved myself out of investing like everybody else into the world of the ultra wealthy. And I did that before I ever became what some people would call part of that affluent group. And so, it's you have to take that leap and start applying some of these things, some of these strategies, some of this mindset, and frankly, some of these actual people into your life, whether that's for, asset protection, whether that's for taxes, et cetera. So we get this incredible group of people teaching this course. I mean, a lot of them. When it comes to real estate, you've got, Ken McElroy, Rich Dad Advisor, and the real estate guys, and in taxes, we've got Tom Wheelwright doing several hours. We get Kevin Day talking about estate planning for several hours. Dean Graziosi on mindset. I mean, he's one of the big names in mindset, and a guy who's got a billion-dollar business. So this is an all-star crew. We shot it live in Phoenix, and then there's a bunch of screen flows that I've done personally as well. Hugely, huge effort to put this together. And it also includes membership to the Wealth Formula Network, which is ultimately one of my big messages in there, is that investing is a team sport, and you have to have people around you who are successful, and those people are going to there's a collective intelligence that's going to help you grow your wealth. So that's really what it is, and it's called Your Roadmap to Real Wealth. And I'm sure you can provide some kind of a link for that or something.
Yeah, and if I know you, you get really antsy when you consume content or all these videos out there that are just kind of really lame and don't really provide any value. But if I've known from your previous webinars you do, it's very it's new stuff. It's not like stuff you've heard before, the free giveaway kind of stuff. So this is the real deal, folks. Buck, are you going to be doing the special consults for some of my guys? Maybe do a couple of them if people sign up. I know that went away in April.
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. I mean, your guys, that your guys sign up. We can do, for my group, we certainly did this 1 hour coaching and strategy, and I think Lane, you could probably attest to the benefit of that yourself. But so what we'll do is typically if you sign up for the course, we can do this for your group too. What I do is I send out like a bunch of questions. We try to figure out where you are, and then really try to build your own personal roadmap from there. So I think a lot of people are finding that really beneficial, certainly in my group, and happy to do it for yours as well.
Yeah. So there's your Easter egg there, guys, for staying to the end of this webinar. And if you guys check out the website, simplepassivecashflow.com/Buck, BUCK. Check out details there. And thanks for coming on, Buck.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, we'll do this again maybe in 4 or 5 years once you write that kid's book, How to Raise a Kid.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. We'll start writing that now.
Yeah, start writing notes. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Got to get back to work, or got to go.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.